everyone. Welcome to GNT, where we share fantastic stories and through great interviews with people. Today's special event, we've got a live audience here as well, so it's not scary at all, is it, Lavinia?
It's fine. They're lovely.
Good. So, Dr. Codd, may I call you Lavinia?
Yes, of course.
Excellent. So welcome. Dr. Codd, for everyone, could you share your background as a doctor, type of doctor you are, and what you do at the Brisbane, the Queensland Institute?
Queensland Brain Institute.
Yeah.
So I'm a neuroscientist. So I have a PhD. I don't have a medical degree. I have a PhD. So I have the science degree, and then I did my PhD for 7 years, which is a little longer than usual. But I was part time, and it was also after the stroke. So,
Yeah. Okay. So with regards to the stroke that you had, can you explain how that unfolded for you?
Sure. My husband and I were at a ball. It's the first time we'd been out in some time because I had two young kids. So I had a son who was 11 months old, Sam, and a daughter, Zoe, who was 2 3/4. So we didn't go out much. We were all dressed up. I had a beautiful red ball dress on. I looked fabulous, I would say. But we were at the ball, and it hadn't even really started. I was still breastfeeding, so I wasn't drinking. And okay, somebody was making an announcement, and as part of that announcement there was some flashing lights, and I had a headache for the couple of days leading up to it, but it was just a headache. I wouldn't have called it a migraine, it was just a headache. But as soon as the flashing lights happened, nobody ever believes this, but I heard a little sound, like a sound, when you put a match out under water, that little sound. I didn't faint, I didn't fall over, there was no obvious outward sign that I'd had a stroke. The first thing that we noticed was when I was trying to read the menu, I couldn't. So I was reading, and I was only reading the right-hand side of the page, and I said, I don't understand what they're feeding us. This doesn't make sense. And my husband said, but you're only reading half the line. You've got to read the whole thing. And then he's an accountant, so he's very logical. He held up his fingers and said, how many fingers am I holding up? Now, you can look at that and say 3, very easy. I couldn't count unless I went 1, 2, 3. I had to bend each finger down, like counting like that. And I was in a lot of pain by this stage. And so we thought something was obviously wrong. Went to the hospital, went straight to the hospital. I would have been there within about half an hour, so did everything right, did all the right things. Unfortunately, because of my age, I guess, and because I didn't have any other signs, I didn't have paralysis.
How old were you at the time?
31.
31.
Yeah, nearly 32. I didn't have the droopy face. I didn't have the paralysis in the arm. I didn't have speech problems. I didn't fall into the what
telltale.
people. Yeah. Although there's a move to expand that FAST acronym to be fast for balance and eyes. So if they'd actually checked my eyes, they might have realised that at that stage I'd lost my entire left field of vision. So not my left eye, but my left field. So if I looked down the table, I would have been able to see all of you and none of you. I can now, it's expanded, I can now just see you, but I can't see the leg. But they misdiagnosed me, gave me vasoconstrictors, which is a migraine drug, and unfortunately, because I was having a clot in the posterior cerebral artery, that probably exacerbated it. I'm not trying to be legal here, I've never made a claim against the hospital, but they sent me home and I didn't get better. We went back, they did a scan and said, sorry, you've had a stroke. So by then it was too late, they couldn't do anything.
It's going through that, there's obviously a lot of transformation, so to speak, and getting through all those trials and tribulations that I imagine would have come after people have a stroke, which I find really fascinating, how people can continue to grow and build from that.
And sometimes you have to go backwards before you can go forward, so I developed a bit of a temper. I was very frustrating. So everything was frustrating. I got lost in my own home. I couldn't drive for a year because of the vision loss until I did all the tests and they gave me my license back. But I had 2 little kids, and so having a mother who's got a bit of a temper problem, I was aware of it, my husband was aware of it, so I got help from a neuropsychologist. So I had I had to go through that to realise that I needed help.
Yeah. And so getting that help, where did you find that was the most helpful to getting through it?
Okay, so really because of the deficits that I had, so I've talked about the vision, but I haven't talked about my memory and my spatial navigation. So my damage was in the occipital lobe, so I've lost my left field of vision, but also in the hippocampus, which is the learning memory centre of the brain, and the surrounding temporal lobe.
Yeah.
So all of those areas are critical for learning and memory and navigation, so remembering where you are in space and time. That's why I used to get lost in my own home. So because those deficits don't really lend themselves to sort of therapy, I didn't need physiotherapy, didn't need speech therapy. What do we do with that? It was actually the neuropsychologist that I was seeing who said, by this stage I'll backtrack, I had been an accountant, but I'd gone back to uni to become a scientist, and I was partway through the undergrad degree when it happened. And he said, well, look, Lavinia, I don't know what to do with you, but apart from counselling, and he was a great counsellor because I'd swear and he'd swear right back at me. It was a very robust relationship, let me tell you that. But he basically said, I don't know what to do with you. You've got a memory problem and you get lost a lot. The best thing you could do is go back to uni and finish your degree, because it's not a job where somebody might lose money if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's in a fairly safe environment. There's people everywhere. If you get lost, there's someone to ask. There's apps that you can find around. And you'll be sort of testing or working the very parts of your brain that were damaged. So I was forcing myself to learn and memorise. I had to come up with a whole new learning strategy because I had been a very visual learner. I had to become a verbal learner, so I used mnemonics and stories and things like that to memorise lists of things, whereas before I used to memorise pictures, like if it was anatomy, I'd memorise pictures. I had to totally change that. One of the things I've really learnt is nobody else was going to make me better. I had to make myself better. The flip side of that is sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're not going to get better. So I have not recovered most of my left field of vision. My central vision's fine, but I haven't recovered that. I haven't fully recovered my learning and memory, but I've developed workarounds. But it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'll never be perfect. But life can be great, but nobody else could do that for me. My husband couldn't do it for me, my family couldn't do it for me. They could support me, but they couldn't do it for me. And the only person in the world who's responsible for your happiness is yourself. So I had to make myself happy. Nobody can do that for me. So that was probably the biggest thing I really experience.
And it's a remarkable story about how you've been able to go through that. So going through that, what are some of the other wisdoms that you could share? That
you should accept help when it's offered. And if people push you too much, it's alright to say back off. I can't do that. My memory is not good enough for that. I can't do that. So recognizing your own limits, but also being willing to challenge them a little bit. You do have to go out of your comfort zone. I mentioned before when I first started doing public speaking, I used to get terribly sick. It was a horrible experience. I hated it. But the more I did it, I made the decision that I actually had to overcome this fear that I had. Otherwise, it was going to kill me because I kept getting asked to do these things. So it's like, well, I better get over it. So I did have to step out of my comfort zone and push myself. But everything's a balance. Everything in life is a balance. But the biggest one was it was up to me to make those decisions. I had to make decisions. I couldn't let life just happen. If life had just happened to me, if I just let it keep rolling over me, I'd be at home watching daytime television and I wouldn't have left. I wouldn't have got my licence back, I wouldn't have finished my degree, I wouldn't have got my PhD, and I wouldn't have learned all the stuff that I know now and met the wonderful people that I've met and come to things like this.
And so what you're saying is that despite the fact of great family and friends support, I'd imagine, is that the responsibility really comes down to you. No matter what sort of help you could get from others, it's really up to you.
The victim mentality never really sit well with me. Having said, you do need to wallow in depression when it happens. It was a horrible time at the beginning, and everything was just crap, and I had to really wallow around in it and feel very, very sorry for myself because I it was a horrible thing.
Absolutely.
And
I think we'd all agree.
Well, you have to give yourself permission to grieve as well, and it is a grieving process. So it wasn't just the fact that I had this brain damage now. I'd lost a massive part of myself. You know, a lot of my self-identity was tied in with the fact that I'm a smart person and people know that. I like people, I've got a huge ego and I like people thinking I'm smart, and all of a sudden I couldn't do anything, you know, I couldn't.
Bit of a cheat there.
So yeah,
It's like, what is my identity then?
what is your identity? So yeah, you do have to go through that transformation, that change, the horrible stuff to get out, and like it's about 31% of all stroke survivors in Australia, so they've survived their stroke, are under the age of 65, so still within working life. So I think it's important, you know, the thing for us when you have a young stroke, you might still be having relationships, having children, working, you know, you've still got your whole life ahead of you, and so you need support. Stroke is often a hidden thing, so there's no way anyone in this room can tell that I've had a stroke. You can't tell from the outside that I've had a stroke. And yet it was incredibly crippling. I was terrible with faces. I couldn't remember faces. I couldn't remember. I'm better at that now. You know, I couldn't get from one lecture room to the other without using a map. I would get very stressed. It was a very stressful time. And also, the main thing that I'd really like to share is that recovery happens over a lifetime. So I'm still recovering, and I will be recovering until I die. And it was only a few years ago, so, you know, 20 years after the stroke, roughly, my daughter noticed that I was less stressed when I was driving. She said, "You're totally different now to how you were a few years ago." So, and this is a long time after my stroke. So even my behaviour was still evolving and changing and improving as I became more comfortable with my limitations. So I think, like, I love that, because, you know, when you see the neurologist after a stroke, I was drawn a graph. Most people will be drawn a graph, and they're told that you'll steadily get better for the first year or two, and then you'll plateau, and then, you know, there won't be any recovery after that. Well, nobody ever explained the axes on that to me. Nobody told me what was this recovery. Was it what they could measure, or was it what I could measure? Was it physical strength from somebody with paralysis, or was it cognitive and memory strength? And so I found that terribly, terribly upsetting. You know, when I got to a year after the stroke, I had a massive panic attack because I was still really bad at this stage. And I thought, well, this can't be it. I still need, you know, I've got a long way to go. And then I kept getting better, and then I got to 2 years, and I thought, oh, maybe the plateau will happen now. And it definitely, the recovery did slow down, but it kept going, and it was important to me. And the things that were getting better, like being able to walk to a car park and find my car, was important to me. So, you know, recovery means different things to different people. Strokes are different for everyone, but recovery happens in my life, and the stroke was out of my control, whereas when I was studying it, I was sort of, I was making it work for me. I don't know if that, does that make sense? So I was in control of it.
Yeah, well, that's very powerful, I imagine.
It was, and it was definitely, the novelty wore off by the 7th year. That was a really long PhD. But I think, that was a powerful thing that I learned.
And so with the Queensland Brain Institute, would you like to share a bit of a story about what you guys are doing there, guys and girls?
Sure. So we're actually quite a big institute. We've got 450 people. We're an institute within the University of Queensland out at the St Lucia campus. So, you know, the university has lots of different schools and faculties. So the School of Biomedical Sciences, the School of Engineering, the Business School. But in addition to those schools, they've got a couple of research-intensive institutes, and the Queensland Brain Institute is one of those institutes. So we aim to understand the brain better in both health and disease to improve the lives of people. We also want to inspire technology and improve learning and memory. If you look at sort of the work that we do, you can sort of break it up really roughly, because there's a lot of overlap between these things. Fundamental science, we want to understand how we perceive things and how we sense things, how we take in information and process it, how we store information and retrieve it, so that whole memory circuit, how we attend to things and make decisions, how certain things like sleep and exercise are good for the healthy brain, We also then look at dementia is a really big area of research for us. We have about 90 people out of 450 working in the dementia space. It's a growing problem, so we do a lot of research in dementia, lots of different projects, and there's too many to go through. But then in addition, there's all the other neurodegenerative diseases, like I mentioned, motor neuron disease and Parkinson's. You know, if there's a neurodegenerative disease, there's likely somebody at the Brain Institute looking at that. And then mental health is the other really big thing. So anxiety and depression, OCD, autism spectrum disorder, these are all addiction. These are all things that we research. But from a very fundamental level, most of our scientists are what we call basic or fundamental scientists. So we do a lot of work trying to understand the genes, the proteins, and the cell processes that make up the brain, which then is what behaviour is. You know, there's the relationship between the structure and behaviour.
Like there is some research there that'd be really helpful.
Well, addiction. You know, it's you know, we do a lot of epigenetic research, looking at the changes in the structure of the DNA, and how that impacts on behaviour. So you're not, you know, when you're born, you have a set of genes. Those genes change slightly throughout time. They mutate, but they also, the structure, the 3D structure of the DNA changes, and that changes the likelihood of a gene to be used or not, which impacts on behaviour. I mean, these are incredibly complex things, but unless you do it, we don't get to understand the brain, we don't get to come up with new treatments. And I don't know about you, but I'm not satisfied where medical history is, or medical treatments. I want there to be improvement. So we need fundamental science to feed that pipeline of discovery.
And funding.
Yeah, we need funding. So if you've got $1 million, come and talk to me. If you've got $1, come and talk to me. I mean, you know, I'm not picky. But we survive mainly on...
Lavinia, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Really enjoyed you here today. So it's so great to hear your story and share it yet again. So a round of applause for Lavinia. Some flowers.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Thank you. So thank you very much for joining us for the G&T today. Hope you got a lot out of it, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. If you want to reach out, absolutely make contact with us at Fairway. Be safe and be good and well. Be well. Thank you again for joining us for the G&T series. Once again, really great wisdom to hear from our clients. I really love to share the behind the scenes, so to speak, hearing all those good stories from clients. If you have any questions from the series of what we've been showing, absolutely reach out. As you can quite tell, it's all about relationships for us here at Fairway, and always up for a cup of tea. Thank you.